Today on Professor Tom's Philosophy in 10, Descartes' evil demon and the skeptical wars. Today I want to give you a brief history of the Great War of the Skeptics. Many skeptical arguments only address one kind of knowledge. That your senses have deceived you in the past might be good reason to avoid reliance on them in the future, but that, as a skeptical argument, has little to say about either purely rational knowledge of things like logic and mathematics, or of knowledge gained from religious and mystical experiences. Similarly, a proof that God, conceived of as a supreme creator with all the great-making properties, such as omniscience, omnipotence, and omnibenevolence, a proof that such a God can't possibly exist as a matter of logic would be dear to many in the land of the religious skeptics, but it's not likely going to be of much interest to these skeptics of the senses, or, for that matter, the skeptics of rational thought. But some skeptical arguments seem to cut across boundaries, and seem to include reasons to be skeptical of religious and mystical experience, our senses, and of reason itself. Ages ago, one such argument plunged the various countries in the lands of the skeptics into a brutal war. What skeptical argument could possibly have given rise to such a conflict? Well, it was none other than an argument found in the first meditation in René Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy, in which are demonstrated the existence of God and the distinction between the human soul and the body. Most philosophy students are familiar with Descartes' evil, deceiving demon argument. It shows up at the end of the first of Descartes' Meditations, and I would venture to guess that 95% of all college-level Philosophy 101 courses include the Meditations on the syllabus. Grappling with Descartes' evil demon, as well as with Descartes' attempt to rescue us from the demon's grip through the claim that we must exist if we're thinking, is sort of a rite of passage for first-year college students. Descartes' project in the Meditations was to rescue knowledge of God, the soul, and science from the rising skepticism that science itself had occasioned. His ultimate solution rests in his claim that there are some things that we can know are true indubitably. Not just that if we think we must exist in order to be able to think, but also that we have immortal souls, that God as conceived by Western philosophers exists, and finally that we can trust science since it is underwritten by God. But Descartes believed that he had a serious task to complete before he reached the high mountain peaks of these conclusions. As he wrote at the very beginning of the first meditation,
"Some years ago, I was struck by how many false things I had believed, and by how doubtful was the structure of beliefs that I had based on them. I realized that if I wanted to establish anything in the sciences that was stable and likely to last, I needed, just once in my life, to demolish everything completely and start again from the foundations. It looked like an enormous task, and I decided to wait until I was old enough to be sure that there was nothing to be gained from putting it off any longer. I have now delayed it for so long that I have no excuse for going on planning to do it rather than getting to work. So today I have set all my worries aside and arranged for myself a clear stretch of free time. I'm here quite alone, and at last I will devote myself, sincerely and without holding back, to demolishing my opinions."
And demolish he did. He first noticed that his senses have often deceived him, and thus they are an untrustworthy foundation for knowledge. Descartes then considered the possibility that he might be dreaming. The very thought made him dizzy, and he ended up wondering if he even knew that he had hands. Again, the senses proved to be entirely untrustworthy. But what of mathematics? Descartes is well known for his creation of analytical geometry, which uses algebraic formulas to describe geometric figures. You probably know this stuff through the Cartesian coordinate system. In any case, even when he was dreaming, even if his senses deceive him 100% of the time, he can still know the truths of mathematics, right? 1 + 1 = 2, for example. He couldn't possibly be wrong about this, could he? It was at this point that Descartes introduced the evil demon. He wrote,
"I shall suppose that some malicious, powerful, cunning demon has done all he can to deceive me. I shall think that the sky, the air, the earth, colors, shapes, sounds, and all external things are merely dreams that the demon has contrived as traps for my judgment. I shall consider myself as having no hands or eyes or flesh or blood or senses, but as having falsely believed that I had all these things. I shall stubbornly persist in this train of thought. And even if I can't learn any truth, I shall at least do what I can do, which is to be on my guard against accepting any falsehoods, so that the deceiver, however powerful and cunning he may be, will be unable to affect me in the slightest.
Descartes' evil demon argument is one of the most powerful skeptical arguments ever conceived. If it is possible that a malicious but all-powerful godlike being exists who delights in nothing more than deceiving us, then not only can we not be assured that our empirical observations are correct, we can't even trust the products of rational thought. We can't trust our beliefs about logic or mathematics. And though Descartes doesn't say it out loud, if it is possible that such an all-powerful evil deceiver exists, we can't even trust religious or mystical experience, since presumably the evil deceiving godlike demon could deceive us about even those. Now, as I said, Descartes offered a solution to this apparently all-destroying skeptical argument and thought that he had, over the course of the remaining 5 meditations, proven the existence of God and the distinction between the human soul and the body, as it says in the title of the meditations, and he thought he'd rescued science to boot, but that's a story for another video. Let me return to the Great War of the Skeptics. As is the case with most wars, this was not so much a war over or even of ideas as a war over property. Who owns the evil demon argument? The first shots were fired when a faction among the leaders of the skeptics of the senses began to claim, quite loudly in their public square, that Descartes' argument is properly only about the senses. Like philosophical fanatics everywhere, they appealed to the text to prove their views. Where, they asked, does the great skeptic claim that the evil demon can and does deceive us about anything else? Mathematics and other things pertaining to pure reason only appear in a single sentence. The great skeptic, this was their name for Descartes, the great skeptic only observes,
"For whether I am awake or asleep, 2 plus 3 makes 5, and a square has only 4 sides. It seems impossible to suspect that such obvious truths might be false."
And after describing the evil deceiver, Descartes only talks about empirical knowledge. The evil demon argument is ours, and we demand that skeptics in all other lands cease using it without compensating us. We own it. This, of course, merely inflamed the brains of the skeptics of rational knowledge. Why, can't you see, they responded, that his most revered skeptic, and this was their title for Descartes, his most revered skeptic has clearly indicated to anyone with a speck of logical acumen that the evil demon argument was intended to apply to knowledge gained through pure reason, such as mathematical and logical knowledge. The earlier arguments about misperceptions and dreams, they suffice for your puny needs, you skeptics of the senses. The evil demon argument was developed because those earlier arguments don't touch mathematics or logics. The evil demon argument is ours. We own it. You must cease employing the argument unless you pay us for the privilege and publicly declare the errors of your logic. Mostly the religious skeptics remained on the sidelines, for they were happy to see their two neighbors come to blows and thought that they could profit economically and philosophically from the conflict. And come to blows it did. The sensory skeptics took microscopes and telescopes from their laboratories and classrooms and turned them into bludgeons. The skeptics of rational knowledge responded with pointed barbs and cutting abstractions. And, as is the case in most wars, it was the promising youth of each land that were sent out to destroy their neighbors. And family members, I should add, since not a few young people, on attaining adulthood, had felt that they belonged in one of the neighboring communities and had left their homelands to learn the skeptical arguments of other lands. It was an asymmetrical war, of course, for microscopes and telescopes are no defense against pointed barbs and cutting abstractions, and no abstraction, however cutting, has ever shielded a thinker against a righteously wielded cudgel. And thus, a whole generation was destroyed, but some good did come of this. Skeptics of all lands came to realize that war is good for absolutely nothing. You will now find skeptics of the value of war in high offices of the governments of every part of the lands of the skeptics. Now, the only strife is academic, as the various factions argue about the success of Descartes' cogito ergo sum as a solution to the problem. These debates can get pretty heated, of course. I once saw one skeptic, from which land I forget, overturn a stein, place a shoe on their head, and walk out of the hall. The remainder of the debaters went on to debate the meaning of these actions, of course.